It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. It's a phrase we've all heard before. I'm sure we've all read a comic at least once in our lives, whether you've just read the Sunday comics in the newspaper, read a graphic novel, or a huge superhero comic fan. I'm sure we can all recognize the iconic format that comics have. I am personally very familiar with comics, as someone who has read hundreds of comics and owns plenty of my own copies of superhero comics. Throughout the many years comics have existed, they've always been evolving and changing in order to become what they are recognized for today. Their many panels, bright colors, and elaborate characters. First, I am going to explain where comics came from and how they have come to be so vastly popular. Second, I'll tell you how they have evolved in recent years in order to change with the times and remain so relevant even in today's society. According to an article published by the Frankfurt Community Library, the first comic published in the United States was released in 1896 and was written by a man named Rudolf Topher, who illustrated and wrote the whole thing. He was the first person to ever use the term comic in reference to a short story using multiple panels of illustration and speech bubbles. His comic was featured in the New York Times and was historically the first comic to be featured in a newspaper, which would later set a precedent for newspapers to include comic strips in their work for some comedic relief. According to an article published on the PBS website, during the 1930s and leading into the beginning of the World War II, comics would see a very drastic increase in popularity due to Americans' desire for a boost in spirits. In 1938, the first Superman comic was launched, and people were enamored. It was not only incredibly affordable, but portable as well. Most importantly, it showed the triumph of good over evil, reflecting the tense and political climate at the time. This was most prevalent with the first issue of Captain America, which donned a cover depicting Captain America punching Hitler. According to a scholarly journal written by Mariano Sanchez in 2022, after World War II had ended in about 1948, a psychiatrist by the name of Frederick Weatherman would release a book titled Seduction of Innocence, suggesting that comics were not as lighthearted and inspiring as they seemed, but rather exposing younger generations to too much explicit violence. This caused an uproar amongst parents, who then reached out to the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency to seek action against the comic book industry. This caused the committee to place a restriction on explicit violence in comic books, leading them to go underground. After going underground for many years, comics would resurface to main media in the 60s, where their popularity would steadily increase into present times due to a surge in superhero movies. Now that we understand the creation of comic books, as well as their history and evolution, it is time to devolve into how they fit themselves into today's society. In order to stay relevant in today's society, comics need to adapt in order to fit today's standard of entertainment in such a vastly different time than when they came out in 1869. According to a journal written in 2023 by English student of Malong State University, Anissa Harris, comics can now be used as teaching resources due to their use of multimedial text. Comics use a combination of images, text, and motion that can be very useful in teaching children about conversations and body language. As well as being used as a learning device, comics have adapted to fit the new age of entertainment in the form of movies. According to a column in The New Yorker written in July 2023 by journalist Michael Schulman, Marvel Comics was the first comic to enter Hollywood and make a big standing for superhero movies in 2008. Marvel released their first Iron Man movie, which led to a drastic increase in popularity for superhero movies that will continue steadily into the future. Now that we all know where comics started and have adapted into, it's time to wrap things up. In conclusion, comic books have been able to last and stay relevant since the 1800s due to their constant history of being able to adapt to ever-changing needs of society. I first told you where comics started and how they were able to reach the drastic level of popularity. I then told you how they were able to keep that popularity for the last 150 years. So the next time you go to see a superhero movie, you will know the extensive past that brought that story to theaters.